woman with a PhD in chemistry, a neighbor with a gun and a grudge, an NFL star gunned down in his own home. This is Crime Unknown, and over the next hour, we're taking you deep into 10 North Carolina murders that shocked a state and exposed the darkest corners of the American justice system. I'm your host, and before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. These stories will disturb you. They'll challenge everything you think you know about justice. And by the end, you'll understand why some of these killers walked free while others wait for execution. Let's start with poison. Case 1. Ann Miller Contz, December 2nd, 2000. University of North Carolina Hospital, Chapel Hill. 30-year-old Eric Miller is dying, and his doctors don't know why. His organs are failing, his blood pressure is crashing. His wife Ann stands at his bedside, a research chemist at pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline, watching her husband's life slip away. What nobody knew yet? She was the one killing him? Eric Miller wasn't just any victim. He was a pediatric AIDS researcher, one of the brightest minds in infectious disease. His colleagues at UNC considered him brilliant. His friends called him kind, generous, selfless. He had everything to live for. But someone had been feeding him arsenic for weeks. The first dose came in November 2000. Eric got violently ill, vomiting, weakness, confusion. Doctors couldn't figure it out. They admitted him to the hospital, ran every test imaginable. Nothing made sense. Then something strange happened. While Eric was hospitalized, hooked up to IVs and monitors, his condition got worse. Not better. Worse. Because Ann Miller walked into that hospital room and injected arsenic directly into his IV line. Let me say that again. She poisoned him at least 6 times over several weeks. And when doctors finally hospitalized him, trying desperately to save his life, she finished the job right there in the ICU. Eric Miller died December 2nd, 2000, at 30 years old. Cause of death: acute arsenic poisoning. But here's where it gets complicated. Nobody suspected murder. Not at first. Eric's death looked like a tragic medical mystery. His wife was a grieving widow. The case went cold. Until January 2001, Daryl Willard, Ann's co-worker at GlaxoSmithKline, killed himself. Gunshot. Suicide note. Dead in his home. And suddenly, detectives started connecting dots nobody saw before. Phone records revealed Ann and Daryl had been having an affair. Not just casual, obsessive. They called each other dozens of times a day. 30-minute conversations at 4:30 in the morning. Emails professing love. A secret trip to the Ritz-Carlton in Chicago just days before Eric's first poisoning. Both had unrestricted access to arsenic in their pharmaceutical lab. But there was a problem. Daryl was dead. Ann wasn't talking. And the evidence was circumstantial. Then came the breakthrough that would change legal history. Before Daryl Willard killed himself, he confessed something to his attorney, Rick Gammon. He told Gammon that Ann Miller had admitted to him that she injected arsenic into Eric's IV, a deathbed confession, essentially. But attorney-client privilege meant Gammon couldn't tell anyone, even after Daryl died, even knowing a murderer was walking free. Prosecutors fought for years to break that privilege. The case went to the North Carolina Supreme Court, twice. Legal experts debated whether a dead man's confession should remain secret forever. Finally, in 2004, the court ruled. Under specific circumstances, when the client is deceased and justice demands it, attorney-client privilege can be pierced. Rick Gammon testified. He revealed what Daryl had told him, that Ann Miller confessed to murdering her husband. On November 8, 2005, nearly 5 years after Eric's death, Ann Miller pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. The courtroom was packed. Eric's family wept. Ann showed little emotion. The judge sentenced her to 25 to 31.5 years in prison. Ann Miller is currently incarcerated at a North Carolina women's correctional facility. Her earliest possible release date? September 2029. She'll be in her 60s. No appeals were ever filed. She accepted her fate. But the legal precedent she created? That lives on. The Ann Miller exception to attorney-client privilege is now taught in law schools across America. CBS's 48 Hours featured the case. So did Snapped and Investigation Discovery. In May 2024, 48 Hours released a podcast episode called Poison, re-examining the case for a new generation. Eric Miller's legacy? His AIDS research continues. His name is on papers still cited today, and his murder exposed a loophole in legal ethics that could have let his killer go free forever. Case 2. Craig Stephen Hicks. February 10, 2015. Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Finley Forest Condominiums. A 46-year-old man named Craig Stephen Hicks walks up to apartment number 5. He's holding a .357 caliber handgun. Inside that apartment are 3 young people. University students. Muslims. Brilliant minds with bright futures. In 36 seconds, Hicks will execute all 3 of them, and the world will debate whether it was murder or just a parking dispute. The victims. Dia Barakat, 23 years old. Second-year dental student at UNC. Newlywed. Humanitarian who raised thousands for Syrian refugees. Yusor Abu Salha, 21. Dia's wife of just 6 weeks. About to start dental school herself. Beautiful, kind, devoted to her faith and family. Razan Abu Salha, 19. Yusor's younger sister. North Carolina State University student, studying architecture. The baby of the family. Craig Hicks was their neighbor. An angry, aggressive man who constantly complained about parking spaces, noise, and what he perceived as disrespect. But there was more to it than that. So much more. Yusor had told her father just 1 week before the murders, "Daddy, I think he hates us for who we are." She was right. Here's what we know about that night. Dia answered the door. His phone was in his pocket, recording. 36 seconds of audio captured everything. Hicks immediately threatened Dia. You can hear the anger in his voice. Then, without warning, he draws his gun and starts firing. Shot after shot after shot. Dia took multiple bullets to the head and chest. Yusor and Razan tried to run. It didn't matter. Hicks executed them both with single gunshots to the head. 3 young people. 3 execution-style killings. All over in half a minute. When police arrived, they found a massacre. Blood everywhere. 3 bodies. A killer who'd already called 911 himself. And here's where the story gets infuriating. Chapel Hill police initially described the murders as being motivated by an ongoing neighbor dispute over parking. A parking dispute. 3 Muslim students executed in their home, and police called it a parking dispute. The response was immediate and furious. Hashtag Chapel Hill shooting trended worldwide. Hashtag Muslim Lives Matter became a rallying cry. The victims' families screamed that this was a hate crime, an Islamophobic execution. But North Carolina law had a problem. The state's hate crime statutes only covered misdemeanors, not felonies. You could prosecute someone for hate-motivated vandalism, but not hate-motivated murder. The FBI launched a parallel investigation, spent months reviewing evidence, interviewed witnesses, analyzed Hicks's online presence and personal history. Their conclusion? They could not find sufficient evidence to successfully prosecute Hicks on hate crime charges. But prosecutors did find something interesting. Witnesses testified that Hicks was rude to white neighbors, but to non-white neighbors, he would threaten violence and brandish a gun. Different treatment, different threats, different level of aggression. At sentencing, even Chapel Hill Police Chief Chris Blue acknowledged the initial characterization was wrong. These murders were about more than simply a parking dispute. Too little, too late, for many. Craig Hicks pleaded guilty on June 12, 2019, to 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. He's currently incarcerated at Bertie Correctional Institution in Windsor, North Carolina. He'll die in prison. But the debate continues. Was this terrorism? Hate crime? Or just a violent man with a gun who happened to kill Muslim neighbors? In 2023, a documentary called 36 Seconds, Portrait of a Hate Crime, premiered. The film argues passionately that this was Islamophobic violence, pure and simple. In February 2025, the 10-year anniversary, the documentary screened again at commemorative events across North Carolina. The victims' families continue advocating for stronger hate crime laws. Dia Barakat was raising money to provide dental care for Syrian refugees. Yusor was preparing for dental school to serve underserved communities. Razan was designing sustainable architecture for the developing world. 3 lives dedicated to helping others. 3 futures erased in 36 seconds. The cell phone recording has never been publicly released. Too graphic, too disturbing. But prosecutors played it in court, and those who heard it say it's unmistakable cold-blooded execution. Craig Hicks offered no real explanation, no remorse, just a guilty plea and a lifetime in prison. Justice served? Maybe. Justice equal to the crime? The victims' families would say no. Case 3, Deidra Lane. July 6, 2000. Charlotte, North Carolina. A quiet suburban home. Inside, Deidra Lane waits with a 12-gauge shotgun. Her husband Fred is flying back from Nashville. His brother-in-law is picking him up from the airport. Fred Lane is 24 years old, running back for the Carolina Panthers. Fourth, all-time leading rusher in franchise history with 2,001 yards. A Division II star who beat impossible odds to make the NFL. He has no idea his wife is about to kill him. Fred walks through the door around 10 p.m. Deidra fires. Once in the chest, Fred goes down. Then she stands over him and fires again, execution style, back of the head. Deidra's defense? Self-defense. She claimed Fred had been choking her, abusing her, threatening her life. The evidence told a very different story. First, the second shot. Fred was already on the ground when Deidra fired that second blast. That's not self-defense. That's execution. Second, Deidra had 0 marks on her body consistent with strangulation. Police examined her immediately after the shooting. No bruising, no defensive wounds, nothing. Her gynecologist testified at trial. She'd never found any injuries consistent with the domestic abuse Deidra claimed, ever. Third, Fred's teammates told a completely different story. William Floyd, Muhsin Muhammad, Chris Terry, all Panthers players met with police. They described Fred as the victim in the relationship. They'd seen him with knots and scratches and bruises. They witnessed Deidra's aggression. They knew Fred was in trouble, but didn't know how to help. Fourth, 2 weeks before the murder, Deidra fired that same shotgun through a wall in their home. Just to make a point. She covered the exit hole with a Mickey Mouse drawing, like it was a joke. And fifth, the $5 million motive. 3 months before Fred's death, Deidra had filed a massive life insurance policy on him. $5 million payable on his death. The judge reviewed all this evidence and said it showed intentional and premeditated actions with malice. So what happened? How much time did Deidra Lane serve for executing her NFL husband? She pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter in August 2003. The sentence? 7 years and 11 months. She served less than 6 years. Released March 3, 2009. Let that sink in. Execution-style murder of a 24-year-old man with a brilliant future ahead of him. Less than 6 years in prison. Fred Lane never got to fulfill his potential. Never got to see what kind of NFL career he could have built. Never got to have children, grow old, enjoy the fruits of all his hard work. Deidra got out while she was still young enough to rebuild her life. Changed her name back to Deidra Gary. Moved on. In 2013, controversy erupted when someone discovered she was working at a children's summer camp at St. Augustine's University in Raleigh. Parents were outraged. A convicted killer working with kids? The Panthers retired Fred's number informally. His teammates still talk about him. His family still mourns him. But Deidra Lane? She's free. Living her life. No longer in the criminal justice system. The disparity between the crime and the punishment raises uncomfortable questions. Would a man who executed his wife with a shotgun serve only 6 years? Would prosecutors offer the same plea deal? We'll never know for sure. But the optics look bad. Really bad. Fred Lane beat incredible odds to make the NFL. He came from a Division II school most NFL scouts never saw him play, but he had heart, determination, and raw talent. The Panthers gave him a shot. He proved himself. 2,001 yards. Touchable memories for Carolina fans. All of it ended by 2 shotgun blasts in his own home. By the woman who was supposed to love him. 7 years and 11 months. That's what his life was worth in the eyes of North Carolina justice. Case 4. Robert Jason Owens. March 2015. Buncombe County, North Carolina. A young pregnant couple disappears without a trace. Christy Shone Codd, 38 years old. 5 months pregnant with a baby girl they planned to name Skylar. A chef who'd worked on major Hollywood productions including Terminator Genesis. Talented, creative, loved. Her husband JT Codd, 45, devoted father-to-be. Excited about their growing family. The last time anyone saw them was March 11, 2015. They were home, doing renovations, working with their neighbor and contractor. That contractor was Robert Jason Owens, and he was about to commit one of the most horrific crimes in North Carolina history. Here's what we know. Sometime around March 11th or 12th, Owens killed both Christy and JT. Then, he dismembered Christy's body in the shower of their home. He took the remains, what was left of a pregnant woman and her unborn daughter and her husband, and cremated them in a wood stove on his property. Burned them. Destroyed the evidence. Nearly got away with it. Police started investigating when friends reported the couple missing. Something was clearly wrong. Christy and JT weren't the type to just disappear. Detectives looked at Owens immediately. He was the last person seen with them, and when they started digging into his story, it fell apart fast. A witness saw Owens putting large trash bags into a dumpster after the cods vanished. Surveillance footage confirmed it. Police searched pawn shops, found a laptop, jewelry, and a Glock handgun, all belonging to the cods, all pawned by Owens days after their disappearance. Then, on March 20th, 2015, a suspicious fire destroyed a trailer on Owens's property, right in the middle of the investigation. Convenient, right? Except police had already found human remains in a wood stove on the property. Too late to destroy that evidence. On March 16th, Owens confessed, admitted to killing them, admitted to dismembering Christy in the shower, admitted to cremating their bodies, but he claimed it was all an accident, said he accidentally ran over JT with his vehicle, said Christy's death was also unintentional. Prosecutors had a problem. Most of the physical evidence was gone, cremated, destroyed, scattered. They couldn't definitively prove premeditation, couldn't prove how the murders really happened. So Owens pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder. Christy, JT, and unborn Skylar. Sentenced to 59.5 to 74.5 years. He's currently incarcerated at a North Carolina correctional facility. His earliest possible release? 2076. He'll be 96 or 97 years old. Essentially a life sentence. But the story doesn't end there. Because Robert Jason Owens had another secret. One that connected him to a 15-year-old cold case that had haunted Asheville police for over a decade. January 2nd, 2000. 18-year-old Zeb Quinn finishes his shift at Walmart. He leaves with his coworker, Robert Jason Owens. Zeb Quinn is never seen again. 2 weeks later, police find Zeb's car in a hospital parking lot. Inside the vehicle, a live black Labrador puppy. Lips and exclamation marks drawn in lipstick on the windshield. The driver's seat adjusted for someone much shorter than Zeb. Bizarre clues that led nowhere. The case went cold. Zeb's family spent 15 years wondering what happened to their son. Then in 2015, Robert Jason Owens gets arrested for murdering the cods. And suddenly, detectives start looking at him for Zeb Quinn too. In July 2022, Owens pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact in Zeb Quinn's death. But he didn't admit to killing Zeb. Instead, he claimed his uncle Gene Owens, who died in 2017, was the actual killer. Said his uncle murdered Zeb and that he just helped cover it up afterward. Convenient that his uncle was dead and couldn't dispute the story. Zeb Quinn's body has never been found. His family still doesn't have closure. But they know Robert Jason Owens knows more than he's saying. Here's the question that haunts this case. Why did it take so long to charge Owens? 4 different district attorneys had this case over 15 years. 4 different prosecutors looked at the evidence, looked at Owens, and didn't charge him. Was it insufficient evidence? Political pressure? Incompetence? We may never know. What we do know is that Robert Jason Owens was walking free for 15 years after Zeb Quinn vanished. Free to kill again. Free to murder a pregnant woman, her husband, and their unborn child. Christy Schoen Codd dreamed of opening her own restaurant someday. She'd catered for movie sets, corporate events, weddings. Her food was art. JT Codd was excited to be a father. Preparing the nursery. Picking out baby clothes. Building a crib. Skylar never got a chance at life. Never took a breath. Never felt sunshine on her face. 3 lives. Stolen by a neighbor they trusted. Destroyed and cremated like they never existed. Robert Jason Owens will die in prison. But it took 2 murders, technically 3, before the system finally stopped him. Zeb Quinn's family is still waiting for answers. Still hoping someday they'll find his body and bring him home. Justice delayed. Justice incomplete. Justice that came 15 years too late. Case 5. Crystal Mangum. March 2006, Durham, North Carolina. Duke University. A exotic dancer named Crystal Mangum makes an accusation that will dominate headlines for over a year, destroy careers, expose prosecutorial misconduct, and ultimately be proven completely false. She claims 3 Duke lacrosse players raped her at a team party. The district attorney, Mike Nifong, runs with it. Talks to the media constantly. Makes inflammatory statements. Promises justice. It becomes a national story about privilege, race, sexual violence, and college athletics. There's just one problem. It never happened. DNA tests come back. No match to any Duke lacrosse players. Not one. Multiple inconsistencies emerge in Mangum's story. The timeline doesn't work. Physical evidence contradicts her claims. Witnesses place the accused players elsewhere. In April 2007, North Carolina Attorney General Roy Cooper does something extraordinary. He doesn't just dismiss the charges. He declares the 3 accused players innocent. Not just not guilty, innocent. Victims of a tragic rush to accuse. Mike Nifong gets disbarred. The state bar finds him guilty of fraud, dishonesty, and deliberately withholding exculpatory DNA evidence. His career is over. His reputation destroyed. The 3 accused players, David Evans, Colin Finnerty, and Reed Seligman, sue Duke University and win settlements. Their names are cleared, but the damage lingers. Crystal Mangum disappears from the headlines. The media moves on. The story fades. But Mangum's story doesn't end there. Not even close. April 3rd, 2011. Durham, North Carolina. 5 years after the Duke lacrosse case. Crystal Mangum is living with her boyfriend, 46-year-old Reginald Day. They're arguing. The fight escalates, and Mangum grabs a kitchen knife. She stabs Dye in the back and flank. Critical wounds. He's rushed to Duke University Hospital, the same hospital where the lacrosse case had been such a scandal years earlier. Before surgery, before the painkillers and anesthesia, Reginald Day tells investigators exactly what happened. He was trying to get away from Mangum, trying to flee, trying to escape. She stabbed him while he was retreating. Not self-defense, not standing her ground. She stabbed a man in the back while he was running away. Day survives the initial injury. Doctors think he'll make it. But complications develop. 10 days later, on April 13th, 2011, Reginald Day dies. Crystal Mangum is charged with murder. Her defense? The same claim she made in the Duke case. Self-defense. She was the victim. She was protecting herself from an aggressive, violent man. But the forensic evidence destroyed that narrative. The stab wounds were in Daya's back and flank. The medical examiner was clear. These injuries indicated someone trying to flee, not someone attacking. Prosecutors dug into Mangum's history. What they found was a pattern. A disturbing, violent pattern. In 2010, just a year before killing Dye, Mangum had attacked another boyfriend, assaulted him, set his clothes on fire, and children were in the home when it happened. Children who witnessed the violence. The prosecution portrayed Mangum as a serial abuser with a history of physical violence towards boyfriends. Not a victim, a perpetrator. The jury agreed. On November 22, 2013, Crystal Mangum was convicted of second-degree murder, sentenced to 14 to 18 years in prison. She's currently incarcerated at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women in Raleigh. Her projected release date? February 27, 2026. Just over a year from now. But then came the confession that shocked everyone who'd followed her story. December 2024. Crystal Mangum appears on a podcast called Let's Talk with Kat. And she admits something she denied for 18 years. I testified falsely against them by saying that they raped me when they didn't, and that was wrong. There it is, on the record. The Duke lacrosse allegations were fabricated. Lies. False accusations that destroyed lives, ended careers, and became one of the biggest media fiascos in modern American history. Mangum claimed she wanted validation from people, that she made up the rape story for attention, sympathy, support. She expressed remorse for hurting my brothers, her term for the falsely accused players. The confession came nearly 18 years after the original accusations. Years after Nifong was disbarred. Years after the players were declared innocent. Years after the story faded from headlines. But for the 3 men she accused, the vindication matters. David Evans, Colin Finnerty, and Reed Seligman had always maintained their innocence. Now, finally, the accuser herself admitted they were telling the truth. The Duke lacrosse case became a cautionary tale about rush to judgment, media bias, prosecutorial misconduct, and the danger of believing accusations without evidence. It's taught in journalism schools and law schools as an example of everything that can go wrong in the justice system. But here's what makes Crystal Mangum's story even more complex. She's not just a false accuser, she's a convicted murderer. This isn't a story about a troubled woman who made one mistake. It's a story about a pattern of violence, deception, and manipulation that spanned over a decade. Reginald Day is dead. Stabbed in the back by a woman claiming self-defense, just like she'd falsely claimed rape by men who never touched her. 3 Duke lacrosse players had their lives upended, their names dragged through the mud, their futures jeopardized, all based on lies. Mike Nifong lost his law license for pursuing charges he knew were false. Duke University paid millions in settlements and suffered massive reputational damage. And Crystal Mangum? She'll be released in 2026, having served about 15 years for murder. She gave that podcast confession, admitted her lies, and expressed remorse. But remorse doesn't bring Reginald Day back. Remorse doesn't undo the damage to the Duke lacrosse players. Remorse doesn't restore Mike Nifong's career, though he arguably deserved to lose it for his misconduct. The question everyone asks, why did it take 18 years to admit the truth? Mangum claims she wanted validation, attention, sympathy. The Duke lacrosse case gave her all of that. National media attention, supporters who believed her, a narrative where she was the victim and powerful, privileged white men were the villains. Even after the case fell apart, even after DNA evidence exonerated the players, even after the Attorney General declared them innocent, some people still believed her, still defended her, still insisted something must have happened that night. Now we know. Nothing happened. It was all a lie. A lie that destroyed lives and exposed catastrophic failures in the justice system. Crystal Mangum's podcast confession made headlines, but it didn't change her sentence. She's still serving time for murdering Reginald Day. The Duke confession was just a footnote, a belated admission of guilt for a different crime. When she's released in 2026, she'll be in her late 40s. She'll have spent 15 years in prison for murder and lived with 18 years of lies about rape. The 3 Duke lacrosse players moved on with their lives. David Evans works in finance. Colin Finnerty is in business. Reed Seligman went to law school, became an attorney. They rebuilt. They survived. But Reginald Day didn't survive. His family still mourns him. His friends remember him. And his killer is counting down the days until release. Justice? Partial at best. The false accusers got exposed. The prosecutor got disbarred. The players were exonerated. But a man is still dead, stabbed in the back by a woman who claimed victimhood while destroying lives. Case 6. Jason Young, November 3, 2006. Wake County, North Carolina. A quiet subdivision in the Raleigh area. 29-year-old Michelle Young is 5 months pregnant with her second child, a boy. Her daughter Cassidy, just 2 years old, is asleep upstairs. Michelle's husband Jason is supposedly 170 miles away in Virginia on a business trip. Sometime in the early morning hours, someone beats Michelle Young to death in her own bedroom. At least 30 blows to the head, brutal, savage, unrelenting. When family members find her later that day, there's blood everywhere. Michelle is dead. The unborn baby boy dies with her. And 2-year-old Cassidy is alone in the house, unharmed but traumatized. The investigation focuses immediately on Jason Young. Because it's always the husband, right? Especially when the husband has motive, opportunity, and a suspicious alibi. Let's talk about that alibi. Jason claimed he was at a Hampton Inn in Hillsville, Virginia, 170 miles from home. He checked in the evening of November 2nd. He had a business meeting the next morning. His story seemed solid, except it wasn't solid, not even close. Hotel surveillance footage shows Jason walking toward an exit door just before midnight on November 2nd. He's wearing different clothes than he wore when checking in earlier. Why the outfit change? Then at 11:20 p.m., the surveillance camera goes black, just goes dark. Prosecutors would later argue Jason tampered with the camera, knowing it covered his exit route. Police find the emergency exit door propped open with a small red rock. Someone wanted to leave and return without being detected at the main entrance. But here's the real problem for Jason's alibi. A gas station clerk in King, North Carolina, 45 minutes from the hotel, testified she sold Jason gas at approximately 5:30 a.m. on November 3rd. Think about the timeline. Jason left the hotel around midnight, drove home to Raleigh, murdered his pregnant wife, cleaned up enough to avoid detection, drove back toward Virginia, stopped for gas in King at 5:30 a.m., and checked out of the hotel by morning. Tight timeline, but doable. And that gas station stop was the crack in his alibi. Now, let's talk about motive. Computer forensic analysts examined the Young family computer. The search history was damning. Searches for anatomy of a knockout, head trauma knockout, and divorce. Someone in that household was researching how to knock someone unconscious and researching divorce. Prosecutors argued it was Jason planning his wife's murder. Then there were the affairs, multiple affairs. Jason had been cheating on Michelle with several women, including Michelle's own sorority sister, Michelle Money. Yes, her real name is Michelle Money. You can't make this stuff up. Michelle Young knew about at least some of the affairs. Friends testified she was considering divorce. She wanted custody of Cassidy and child support for both kids. Jason was looking at losing half his assets, paying child support for 2 children, and potentially losing access to his daughter. And then there were the shoes. Bloody footprints at the murder scene matched size 12 Hush Puppy's orbital shoes. Investigators traced the specific model, checked sales records, found that Jason Young had purchased that exact shoe just weeks before the murder. Jason claimed he'd gotten rid of those shoes, threw them away, didn't have them anymore. Convenient. The circumstantial case kept building. Surveillance footage from stores near the gas station in King. Witness testimony about Jason's behavior before and after the murder. Cell phone records showing his movements. But prosecutors had a problem. It was all circumstantial. No murder weapon, no physical DNA evidence definitively placing Jason at the scene. No witnesses to the actual killing. In June 2011, after years of investigation and preparation, Jason Young went to trial. The jury deadlocked. 8-4 in favor of acquittal. Mistrial declared. Prosecutors decided to try again. And in the second trial, they had new evidence. Evidence that would prove devastating. Daycare workers testified about something they'd witnessed in the months after Michelle's murder. 2-year-old Cassidy Young was acting out the crime. She took dolls and reenacted a violent attack, saying, "Mommy's getting a spanking for biting, and Mommy has boo-boos all over." Child psychologists explained that traumatized toddlers often process violence through play. Cassidy was recreating what she'd seen or heard that night. The implication was horrifying. Cassidy was in the house when her mother was murdered. She witnessed something, and in her 2-year-old way, she was telling anyone who would listen what happened. On March 5, 2012, a jury found Jason Young guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. But the legal battle wasn't over. Jason's defense team appealed. In 2014, the North Carolina Court of Appeals vacated the conviction, ruling that certain evidence, including Cassidy's statements, shouldn't have been admitted. Prosecutors appealed to the North Carolina Supreme Court. And in August 2015, the Supreme Court reversed the appeals court decision. The conviction was reinstated. Jason Young would serve life without parole. He's currently incarcerated at Piedmont Correctional Institution in Salisbury, North Carolina. He'll die in prison. Jason Young maintains his innocence. His defense team argued the evidence was entirely circumstantial. No murder weapon, no DNA, no eyewitnesses. Just a theory about a late-night drive and a gas station stop. But jurors didn't believe him. They looked at the totality of the evidence, the affairs, the computer searches, the suspicious alibi, the gas station stop, the bloody shoe prints, and a traumatized toddler reenacting violence, and they concluded Jason Young murdered his pregnant wife. Michelle Young never got to meet her son, never got to watch Cassidy grow up, never got to divorce Jason and build a new life. Cassidy lost her mother at 2 years old. She's now in her early 20s, raised by Michelle's family, carrying trauma no child should ever experience. The unborn baby boy never took a breath, never had a name, never had a chance. And Jason Young, whether guilty or innocent, will spend the rest of his life in prison, convicted on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of a 2-year-old who witnessed something no child should ever see. The case raises uncomfortable questions about circumstantial evidence. Can you convict someone of murder without physical evidence? Without a murder weapon? Without DNA? North Carolina juries said yes. Twice. And the state Supreme Court agreed. Jason Young's supporters say he was convicted on theories and coincidences, that the gas station clerk could have been mistaken about the time or the person, that someone else could have killed Michelle, that the circumstantial evidence, however suspicious, isn't proof beyond reasonable doubt. But prosecutors paint a different picture. They see a man who carefully planned his wife's murder, who tampered with hotel security cameras, who drove through the night to kill his pregnant wife and the unborn son he didn't want, who cleaned up enough to avoid detection, who drove back to Virginia and acted like nothing happened. The truth? Only Jason Young knows for sure what happened that night. What we do know is this: Michelle Young was brutally murdered. Her unborn son died with her. Her 2-year-old daughter was left traumatized. And the man convicted of those crimes is serving life without parole. Justice served? The jury thought so. Michelle's family thought so. The North Carolina Supreme Court thought so. But in cases built entirely on circumstantial evidence, there's always that lingering question, that shadow of doubt. That possibility, however remote that the wrong person is behind bars. Jason Young will spend the rest of his life insisting he's innocent. Michelle Young's family will spend the rest of their lives knowing she's gone. And Cassidy Young will spend the rest of her life processing trauma from a night she was too young to fully understand. 30 blows to the head. That's not quick. That's not an accident. That's rage. Personal rage. The kind of rage that comes from intimate relationships gone wrong. Whether it was Jason Young who wielded that weapon or someone else, one thing is certain. Whoever killed Michelle Young knew her, hated her, wanted her dead, and a family was destroyed in the process. Case 7. Molly and Tom Martens. August 2nd, 2015. Davidson County, North Carolina. A bedroom in an upscale suburban home. 39-year-old Jason Corbett, an Irish citizen working in the United States, is asleep in his bed. His wife Molly is in the house. So is her father, Tom Martens, a retired FBI agent visiting from Tennessee. Within minutes, Jason Corbett will be dead. His skull shattered by at least 12 blows from a baseball bat and a concrete paving stone. So much trauma that pieces of his skull will fall onto the autopsy table. Molly Martens and Tom Martens will both claim self-defense. They'll say Jason attacked them, that they feared for their lives, that they had no choice but to fight back. The physical evidence will tell a very different story. Let's start with how Jason Corbett came to North America. Jason was from Limerick, Ireland. He'd been married before to a woman named Margaret Maggs Fitzpatrick. They had 2 children together, Jack and Sarah. Then Maggs was diagnosed with an aggressive form of asthma and died suddenly in 2006, leaving Jason a widowed single father with 2 young children. He needed help. He hired a nanny. That nanny was Molly Martens, an American woman working in Ireland. She was 25 years old, energetic, good with the kids. Jason was grieving, overwhelmed, trying to balance work and fatherhood. Molly stepped in, cared for Jack and Sarah, became part of the family, and eventually, she and Jason started a romantic relationship. They married in 2011. Molly legally adopted Jack and Sarah, who were still very young. The family moved to North Carolina so Molly could be closer to her father, Tom Martens. Tom Martens wasn't just any father-in-law. He was a former FBI agent with decades of law enforcement experience. He'd worked counterintelligence. He knew how investigations worked. He knew how to talk to police. For the first few years, the marriage seemed fine. Jason worked in finance. Molly stayed home with the kids. They lived in a nice house in Davidson County. Middle-class suburban life. But by 2015, cracks were showing. Jason's family back in Ireland was concerned. His sister, Tracy Corbett Lynch, later testified that Jason seemed unhappy, that he was talking about divorce, that he wanted to take Jack and Sarah back to Ireland. Molly allegedly didn't want the marriage to end. And she definitely didn't want to lose the children she'd adopted and raised for years. On August 1st, 2015, Tom Martens drove from Tennessee to North Carolina to visit his daughter. He arrived at the Corbett home. Everything seemed normal. The next night, August 2nd, something went terribly wrong. According to Molly and Tom's 911 call, Jason attacked Molly. She screamed for her father. Tom came running. There was a violent struggle. Tom grabbed a baseball bat. Molly grabbed a concrete paving stone from a landscaping project. Together, they beat Jason until he stopped moving. Self-defense, they claimed. They were fighting for their lives against a violent, out-of-control man. Police arrived and saw a horrific scene. Jason Corbett's body on the bedroom floor. Blood everywhere. His skull destroyed, beyond recognition. But something didn't add up. Crime scene investigators examined Molly and Tom, looking for injuries, bruises, scratches, defensive wounds, any sign that they'd been in a violent fight for their lives. They found almost nothing. Molly had no visible injuries. The crime scene examiner actually had to instruct her to stop rubbing her neck during the examination, as if she was trying to create marks that weren't there. Tom had minor injuries, but nothing consistent with the violent struggle they described. Then came the blood evidence. Forensic analysts found blood inside the mattress. Think about what that means. Jason Corbett's blood soaked through the sheets and into the mattress itself. That suggests the first blows came while he was lying in bed, not attacking, not standing, lying down. Tom Martens' boxer shorts had blood spatter patterns that indicated Jason's head was on the floor when he was being struck, not standing upright in a fight, on the floor, helpless. The medical examiner's testimony was devastating. Jason Corbett received at least 12 blows to the head. 8 of those blows individually would have rendered him unconscious. 4 of the blows were independently fatal. This wasn't self-defense. This was overkill. This was 2 people beating a man to death long after he posed any threat. Prosecutors dug deeper into the background. They found a co-worker of Tom's who testified that 2 months before the killing, Tom had said, "I hate him," about Jason Corbett. They found evidence that Jason was planning to divorce Molly and return to Ireland with Jack and Sarah, that he was consulting with attorneys, that he wanted out of the marriage. And they found no evidence, none that Jason was violent or abusive. No police reports, no hospital records, no witnesses, nothing. The defense tried to paint Jason as a controlling, abusive husband. They wanted to introduce statements from Jack and Sarah claiming Jason had been mean to them, but the prosecution argued those statements were coached, influenced by Molly after Jason's death. In August 2017, after a dramatic trial covered by media in both the United States and Ireland, a jury found both Molly Martens and Tom Martens guilty of second-degree murder. They were each sentenced to 20 to 25 years in prison. Jason Corbett's family in Ireland wept with relief. Finally, justice. Finally, accountability for a brutal killing. But the story didn't end there, not even close. Molly and Tom's defense team appealed. They argued that the trial judge had made errors. Specifically, that statements from the children shouldn't have been excluded. That the jury should have heard what Jack and Sarah said about their father. In 2020, the North Carolina Court of Appeals agreed. They vacated both convictions and ordered a new trial. The prosecution appealed to the North Carolina Supreme Court. And in 2021, in a 4-3 decision, the Supreme Court upheld the Court of Appeals ruling. New trial ordered. Prosecutors faced a difficult decision. Try the case again, with all the challenges that entailed, or negotiate a plea deal. In October 2023, 8 years after Jason Corbett's murder, Molly pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter. Tom pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. They were sentenced to 51 to 74 months. With credit for the 44 months they'd already served, both were released almost immediately. On June 6, 2024, Molly Martens and Tom Martens walked out of prison, free. They served approximately 4 years for beating a man to death with a baseball bat and concrete paving stone. Jason Corbett's family was devastated. His children, Jack and Sarah, now 20 and 18 years old, issued statements calling Molly a monster. They live in Ireland with their Aunt Tracy, Jason's sister, who won custody after his death. The case sparked outrage in Ireland and among advocates for domestic violence victims. Many saw it as a miscarriage of justice. A brutal killer, walking free because of legal technicalities. But it gets worse. In May 2025, Netflix released a documentary about the case called A Deadly American Marriage. The documentary features interviews with Molly and Tom Martens, Jason's family, investigators, and legal experts. As of December 2025, it's the #1 trending documentary on Netflix. Millions of people are watching, learning about Jason Corbett's murder, and forming their own opinions about whether justice was served. The documentary doesn't take sides. It presents the evidence, the legal proceedings, the appeals, and the ultimate outcome. It lets viewers decide for themselves. But the physical evidence speaks volumes. Jason Corbett received at least 12 devastating blows to the head. 8 would have knocked him unconscious. 4 were independently fatal. Neither Molly nor Tom had significant injuries. The medical examiner was unequivocal. This wasn't self-defense. This was overkill. An attorney who reviewed the crime scene photos said he'd never seen injuries like Jason Corbett's in all his years of practice. The level of violence was extraordinary. So how did Molly and Tom end up serving only 4 years? The answer lies in the complexity of the American legal system. The appeals court found that the trial judge made an error excluding the children's statements. The Supreme Court upheld that decision. Facing a new trial with uncertain outcome, prosecutors negotiated a plea deal. Voluntary manslaughter instead of second-degree murder, a sentence that allowed immediate release with time served. Molly Martens is now free, living under her maiden name. Tom Martens is free, retired, living with the knowledge that he beat his son-in-law to death and served 4 years. Jason Corbett is still dead. His children are still orphaned. His family in Ireland is still mourning. And the question remains, was this justice? The jury in the first trial said no. They convicted both defendants of murder. But legal technicalities overturned that verdict, and a plea deal let them walk free. Jack and Sarah Corbett issued powerful victim impact statements. They described Jason as a loving father who worked hard to give them a good life after their biological mother died. They said Molly turned them against their father, manipulated them, used them. Now in their late teens and early 20s, they're processing not just their father's murder, but years of psychological manipulation and the knowledge that their adoptive mother and grandfather killed him. The international dimension adds another layer to this case. Jason was an Irish citizen. His family is in Ireland. The Irish media covered the case extensively. The Irish government issued statements. This wasn't just a North Carolina murder, it became an international incident. Tom Martin's background as an FBI agent also complicated things. Did his law enforcement experience help him know how to present evidence? How to talk to investigators? How to frame the narrative? Prosecutors believed yes. They argued Tom knew exactly what to say to make it sound like self-defense. That his FBI training gave him tools to manipulate the investigation. But ultimately, it didn't matter. The conviction was overturned. The plea deal was struck. Molly and Tom walked free. Jason Corbett's death certificate lists his cause of death as homicide by blunt force trauma. 12 blows to the head, skull shattered, brain destroyed, and the people who inflicted those wounds served 4 years. 4 years for a life. 4 years for leaving 2 children orphaned. 4 years for international headlines, and a murder that shocked 2 nations. The Netflix documentary asks the question everyone's asking: how did this happen? The answer is complicated. Legal errors, appeals, technicalities, prosecutorial discretion. A system designed to protect defendants' rights, even when those rights lead to outcomes that feel deeply unjust. Molly and Tom Martens are free. They've served their time according to their plea deal. They can rebuild their lives. Jason Corbett will never get that chance. And his children will spend the rest of their lives knowing their father's killers walked free after just 4 years. Case 8. Amber Birch. October 5th, 2014. Clemens, North Carolina. A quiet suburban neighborhood. Police execute a search warrant at 2100 block of Nob Hill Drive. It's a modest house, unremarkable from the outside. But everyone in the neighborhood knows it's troubled. Strange people coming and going. Disturbing noises. An occupant who terrifies local children. Police start digging in the backyard. Within hours, they find skeletal remains. Then, more remains. 2 bodies, buried years earlier. Welcome to the Pazuzu Algarad case. The House of Horrors. But before we talk about what police found, we need to talk about the man who created this nightmare. Pazuzu Algarad was born John Alexander Lawson in 1980 in San Francisco. He had a difficult childhood. Mental illness ran in his family. He struggled with psychiatric issues from a young age. In 2002, when he was 22 years old, he legally changed his name. Pazuzu comes from Mesopotamian mythology, a demon featured prominently in The Exorcist. Ila Algarad means Lord of the Locusts in Arabic. He wanted to embody evil, to become something terrifying. He filed his teeth to sharp points, split his tongue like a snake, covered his face in homemade tattoos, rarely bathed, lived in squalor, embraced Satanism, and claimed to worship demons. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, agoraphobia, manic depression, and alcoholism. He was prescribed medication but rarely took it. He self-medicated with drugs and alcohol instead. The house on Nob Hill Drive became a gathering place for outcasts, addicts, and troubled young people. Algarad's mother owned the property but had limited control over what happened there. The interior became a nightmare, garbage piled everywhere. Animal carcasses, satanic symbols painted on walls, holes punched through drywall. Neighbors complained for years. The smell was unbearable. Strange people came and went at all hours. Local children were terrified of the demon house. But police did nothing. Not until October 2014, when they finally executed that search warrant. The bodies they found belonged to Joshua Frederick Wetzler, 37 years old, and Tommy Dean Welch, 36 years old. Wetzler was killed in July 2009. Welch was killed in October 2009. Their bodies had been buried in the backyard for 5 years before anyone found them. Here's what makes this case so disturbing. Police had been warned, multiple times, by multiple people, starting almost immediately after the murders. In August 2009, just 1 month after Wetzler was killed, a woman went to police. She told them her father had seen a body in Algarad's basement, that he'd helped bury body parts in the backyard. A detective visited the house. Algarad refused to allow a search. The detective left. No warrant, no follow-up, nothing. An anonymous tip came in September 2009. Police took no action. In February 2010, Wetzler's ex-girlfriend went to police. She reported that Pazuzu Algarad had murdered Joshua Wetzler. She gave specific information. She knew details that only someone with inside knowledge would know. Police did nothing. A friend of Algarad's actually provided audio recordings of Algarad admitting to murder. Actual evidence. Actual confessions on tape. Still no action. For 5 years, from 2009 to 2014, credible tips came in, witnesses came forward, evidence was presented, and law enforcement did nothing. It wasn't until October 2014 when a war veteran named Matt Flowers went to police with information about Algarad, asking him to help murder someone at a party, that investigators finally took action. They got a warrant. They searched the property, and they found exactly what multiple people had been telling them for 5 years. Bodies buried in the backyard. Pazuzu Algarad was arrested and charged with murder. So was his girlfriend, Amber Nicole Birch, who allegedly shot Tommy Welch. So was Crystal Nicole Matlock, charged as an accessory. Algarad was held at Central Prison in Raleigh pending trial. On October 28, 2015, he was found dead in his cell. He'd cut a major blood vessel in his arm and bled out. Suicide. The man who wanted to embody evil ended his own life before ever facing trial. But the legal proceedings continued for his co-defendants. Amber Birch pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the death of Tommy Welch. She admitted to shooting him, sentenced to 30 years, 8 months to 39 years, 2 months. She's currently incarcerated at Anson Correctional Institution. Her projected release date is May 2045. She'll be in her 60s. Crystal Matlock pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact. She received 3 to 5 years, released in May 2018 after serving her sentence. The house on Nob Hill Drive became infamous. Media coverage was relentless. The House of Horrors. The Demon House. Satan's Den. On April 24, 2015, the house was demolished. Neighbors cheered as bulldozers tore it down. The lot was cleared. The property sold. Nothing remains of the physical structure where 2 men were murdered and buried. But the questions remain. How did this happen? How did multiple credible witnesses come forward with information about murders, and police did nothing for 5 years? The Viceland documentary, The Devil You Know, released in 2019, explores this question extensively. The filmmakers argue the real horror isn't Pazuzu Algarad's Satanism or his appearance. It's the systematic failure of law enforcement to act on credible information. 5 years, 2 murders, multiple witnesses, audio confessions, and nothing happened until a veteran pushed hard enough to force action. Joshua Wetzler and Tommy Welch were troubled men, addicts, people on society's margins. Did that play a role in why police didn't investigate their disappearances more aggressively? Did investigators assume these were just drug users who'd moved on, left town, cut ties with family? The families of both victims have sued law enforcement agencies. They argue gross negligence, that their loved ones' murders could have been solved years earlier if police had simply followed up on the tips they received. Mental health advocates also point to this case as an example of system failure. Pazuzu Algarad was severely mentally ill. He'd been diagnosed with multiple serious psychiatric conditions. He needed treatment, medication, supervision. Instead, he lived in a house of horrors, surrounded by drugs and violence, completely unsupervised, until he'd killed 2 people and buried them in his backyard. The case also exposed the limits of psychiatric intervention. Algarad was an adult. He had rights. Unless he posed an imminent threat to himself or others, something that could be proven in the moment, authorities couldn't force treatment. But he was posing a threat. He was killing people. And multiple witnesses were telling police exactly that. Still, nothing happened. The Pazuzu Algarad case is ultimately a story about failures. Failure of mental health systems, failure of law enforcement, failure of community intervention, failure to protect vulnerable people. 2 men are dead. Their families never got justice. Algarad killed himself before trial. The co-defendants were convicted, but the mastermind escaped accountability. The house is gone, demolished and cleared, but the memories remain. Neighbors still talk about the horrible smells, the strange noises, the sense that something evil was happening behind those walls. They were right, and for 5 years, nobody with the power to stop it did anything at all. Case 9. Grand and Amanda Hayes. July 13, 2011. Raleigh, North Carolina. 27-year-old Laura Ackerson arrives at her ex-boyfriend Grant Hayes' apartment to drop off their 2 young sons for a custody visit. She never leaves that apartment alive. Within 48 hours, Laura's body will be dismembered in a bathtub, loaded into a U-Haul, driven 1,200 miles to Texas, and dumped piece by piece into an alligator-infested creek. This is the Amanda and Grant Hayes case, and it starts with a custody battle that was about to go very badly for Grant. Laura Ackerson met Grant Hayes at a Raleigh nightclub in 2006. Grant was a musician, charismatic, creative. Laura fell hard, They started dating, moved in together, and soon, Laura was pregnant. Their first son, Grant Hayes IV, was born in 2008. Their second son, Gentle, was born in 2009. Unusual name, Gentle. But Laura was a free spirit. Artistic, a little unconventional. The relationship deteriorated quickly. Grant was controlling, possessive, allegedly abusive. Laura left him, took the boys, and filed for custody. What followed was a bitter, expensive, exhausting custody battle. Court hearings, evaluations, temporary custody arrangements, both sides spending money they didn't have on lawyers. A court-appointed psychologist evaluated both parents. The assessment favored Laura. She was stable, employed, nurturing. Grant was struggling financially, working sporadic gigs as a musician, living in an apartment with his new wife Amanda. A crucial custody hearing was scheduled for August 15, 2011. Laura's attorney believed she would win expanded custody, possibly even primary custody, with Grant getting limited visitation. Grant Hayes was about to lose access to his sons, and he wasn't going to let that happen. On July 13, 2011, Laura drove to Grant's apartment in Raleigh to drop off the boys for what was supposed to be a routine visit. She texted her sister when she arrived. Then her phone went silent. Laura's family tried calling. No answer. They tried texting. Nothing. By the next day, they were frantic. Laura would never go this long without contacting them, especially not when her sons were involved. They reported her missing. Police started investigating, and they quickly focused on Grant Hayes, because just hours after Laura disappeared, surveillance cameras captured Grant at a hardware store, buying a reciprocating saw, the kind used for demolition projects and cutting through tough materials. He also purchased heavy-duty cleaning supplies, plastic sheeting, and other items consistent with a cleanup operation. Then, Grant and Amanda rented a U-Haul truck, loaded it with large coolers, and drove from North Carolina to Richmond, Texas, 1,200 miles away. Why Texas? Because Amanda's sister, Karen Berry, lived there. And she had something Grant and Amanda needed: a boat. When Grant and Amanda arrived in Richmond, they told Karen they were bringing meat that needed to be disposed of. Karen let them use her property, gave them access to her boat, and didn't ask too many questions. What Grant and Amanda actually had in those coolers? Laura Ackerson's dismembered remains. They'd killed her in the Raleigh apartment, dismembered her body in the bathtub, cutting her into pieces small enough to transport, packed the remains in coolers, drove 1,200 miles, and now they were going to dump her body where they thought it would never be found. First, they tried dissolving the remains in muriatic acid. Surveillance footage from Texas stores shows Amanda buying bottles of acid. They poured it over Laura's body parts, hoping it would destroy the evidence. It didn't work. The acid wasn't strong enough, or they didn't use enough of it, or the method was just fundamentally flawed. So they moved to Plan B. They took Karen's boat out to Oyster Creek, a waterway known for its alligator population, and dumped Laura's remains piece by piece into the water. They thought the alligators would destroy the evidence, that Laura's body would never be found, that they'd gotten away with murder. They were wrong. Within days, fishermen discovered human remains in Oyster Creek. Texas authorities recovered more remains. Forensic analysis confirmed it was Laura Ackerson. Police connected the dots fast. Laura had last been seen at Grant's apartment. Grant had purchased a saw and cleaning supplies. Grant and Amanda had driven to Texas with mysterious coolers. Karen Berry told investigators Amanda had confessed to her, saying, I hurt her bad." Grant Hayes and Amanda Hayes were both arrested and charged with first-degree murder. But here's where it gets complicated. They had completely different stories. Grant claimed Amanda killed Laura, that it was an accident or a fight that got out of hand, that he only helped dispose of the body because he was terrified of his wife and didn't know what else to do. Amanda claimed Grant killed Laura, that she wasn't even present when it happened, that Grant forced her to help with the cleanup and disposal under threat of violence. Prosecutors didn't believe either of them. They believed it was a conspiracy, that Grant and Amanda worked together to murder Laura because she was about to win custody. The motive was clear. Laura was going to win in court. Grant would lose access to his sons. Years of custody, battles, and legal fees would end with him having minimal rights. Unless Laura disappeared, the trials were held separately. Grant Hayes went to trial first. In September 2013, the jury heard about the custody battle, the hardware store purchases, the U-Haul rental, the drive to Texas, the dismemberment, the attempted acid disposal, the dump in Oyster Creek. They convicted him of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole. Grant is currently incarcerated at Eastern Correctional Institution in Maury, North Carolina. He'll die in prison. But Grant has never stopped claiming his innocence. In October 2024, he was featured in an ABC 2020 interview titled, "Can I Pray First?" In the interview, Grant maintained that Amanda killed Laura and that he was just a victim of his manipulative, violent wife. Nobody believes him. Not prosecutors, not the jury, not Laura's family. Amanda Hayes went to trial in February 2014. Her defense was similar to Grant's. She claimed the other spouse was responsible, that she was just caught up in a terrible situation, that she feared for her own safety. The jury didn't buy it. They convicted Amanda of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 13 to 16 and a half years. But North Carolina wasn't done with Amanda Hayes. Not by a long shot. Texas prosecutors charged Amanda with tampering with evidence, specifically with transporting and disposing of Laura's remains. That's a separate crime under Texas law, and it carries serious penalties. Amanda was tried and convicted in Texas. She received an additional 20 years to be served consecutively after her North Carolina sentence. In August 2024, Amanda was transferred from North Carolina custody to Texas custody. She's currently incarcerated at the Dr. Lane Murray unit in Gatesville, Texas. Do the math. 13 to 16.5 years in North Carolina, plus 20 years in Texas, served consecutively. Amanda Hayes won't be released until approximately 2034 at the earliest, possibly as late as 2044. She'll be in her 50s or 60s. Meanwhile, Laura Ackerson's sons Grant, the fourth and Gentle, lost both parents. Their mother was murdered and dismembered. Their father is serving life without parole. Their stepmother is serving decades in prison. Who's raising these boys? Laura's family fought for custody and won. They're being raised by relatives who loved Laura and are determined to give these children the stable, loving home Laura wanted for them. These boys will grow up knowing their father killed their mother, knowing their stepmother helped dismember and dispose of the body, knowing their mother's remains were dumped in an alligator-infested creek like garbage. How do you process that? How do you build a healthy life with that knowledge? Laura Ackerson's family has been vocal about the case. They've done interviews, written victim impact statements, attended every hearing. They want people to know who Laura was, not just a murder victim, but a loving mother, a creative spirit, a woman who fought for her children. Grant Hayes' family has been quieter. Some believe his claims of innocence. Others have distanced themselves from him entirely. Amanda Hayes' family has stayed out of the spotlight. Her sister, Karen Berry, who provided the boat used to dump Laura's remains, wasn't charged with any crime. She cooperated with investigators, testified against Amanda, and presumably lives with the knowledge that she unwittingly helped dispose of a murder victim's body. The case raised questions about custody disputes and violence. How many custody battles escalate to murder? How many parents, facing the loss of access to their children, decide killing the other parent is preferable to losing in court? More than we'd like to think. The custody court system is designed to protect children's best interests, but it can't protect against a parent who decides murder is the solution. Laura Ackerson had every reason to believe the legal system would protect her. The evaluation favored her. The hearing was scheduled. Justice seemed inevitable. She never made it to that hearing. She was murdered, dismembered, and dumped in a creek 2 weeks before she would have won custody. Grant Hayes, the fourth and Gentle Hayes, lost everything. Their mother, their father, their stepmother, any sense of normalcy or safety. They're with family now. People who love them, who are committed to their well-being, who will help them navigate the trauma and grief. But they'll carry this burden forever. The knowledge of what happened to their mother, the knowledge of what their father did, the knowledge that a custody dispute, something thousands of families navigate every year without violence, ended in the most brutal way imaginable. Laura Ackerson was 27 years old when she died. She should be 41 now, should be watching her sons grow up, should be celebrating their achievements, supporting them through challenges, being the mother she fought so hard to remain. Instead, she's gone. Her remains were scattered in a Texas creek. Her sons are orphaned, and 2 people are serving decades in prison for destroying her. Justice? Partial. Grant got life without parole. Amanda got decades in 2 states. But no sentence brings Laura back. No amount of prison time gives those boys their mother. In the end, this is a story about the ultimate selfishness. Grant Hayes would rather murder his children's mother than lose a custody battle. Would rather orphan his own sons than accept a judge's ruling. And Amanda Hayes went along with it. Helped kill Laura, helped dismember her, helped drive 1,200 miles to dump her body, all to avoid a custody arrangement she didn't like. Two people put their own desires above the well-being of two young boys, and those boys will pay the price for the rest of their lives. Case 10. Jonathan Richardson. July 2010, Johnston County, North Carolina. A shed behind someone's grandparents' house. No running water, no proper facilities. Just a makeshift shelter where 3 people are living. 21-year-old Jonathan Richardson, his girlfriend Helen Reyes, and Helen's 4-year-old daughter, Tegan Skiba. Helen is in the Army Reserve. She's scheduled for training in New Mexico. She'll be gone for 2 weeks. She leaves Tegan with Jonathan Richardson, the man Tegan calls Daddy. Over the next 10 days, Jonathan Richardson will torture that little girl in ways that will make seasoned investigators break down crying on the witness stand. Tegan Skiba will suffer 144 documented wounds, 66 bite marks, both arms broken, sexual assault, forced alcohol consumption, systematic, deliberate, sadistic abuse. On July 19, 2010, Tegan Skiba will die from blunt force trauma to the head. She was 4 years old. This is the Jonathan Richardson case. And I'm warning you right now. This is the hardest story we're going to tell. If you need to turn this off, nobody will judge you. But if you stay, you need to hear what happened to Tegan. Because cases like this are why the death penalty exists. Jonathan Richardson was Helen Reyes' boyfriend. They'd been together for a while. He lived with Helen and Tegan in that shed behind his grandparents' property in Johnston County. By all accounts, Tegan seemed to like Jonathan, called him Daddy, trusted him, had no reason to believe he would hurt her. Helen Reyes later claimed she didn't know Richardson was violent, that he'd never shown signs of being dangerous, that she trusted him completely when she left for Army Reserve training. The evidence suggests otherwise. Helen knew there had been prior abuse. She'd seen injuries, she'd seen Richardson's temper, and she left Tegan with him anyway. What happened over those 10 days? Forensic evidence paints a horrifying picture. Tegan was beaten repeatedly. Multiple blows to her head, body, arms. Her arms were broken, not clean breaks, but trauma breaks, suggesting deliberate twisting or violent impacts. She was bitten 66 times. Forensic odontologists, dentists who specialize in bite mark analysis, matched the bite patterns to Jonathan Richardson's teeth. He bit this child 66 times. Let that sink in. She was sexually assaulted. The medical examiner found evidence of sexual trauma consistent with abuse. She was forced to drink alcohol. Toxicology found alcohol in her system, not accidental ingestion, but forced consumption. And 9 days into the torture, Richardson filmed Tegan. He set up a camera and recorded her standing against a wall, arms outstretched despite being broken, crying, saying, "When I have to pee, I promise I will tell someone." Richardson is yelling at her in the video, berating her, a 4-year-old child in agony with broken arms, covered in injuries, being verbally abused while her abuser films it. Why did he film it? Prosecutors believe he was documenting his control, creating evidence of her misbehavior to justify his abuse. Or maybe he just enjoyed it. The video was recovered by investigators. It's evidence. It's horrifying. And it was shown at trial. On July 19, 2010, after 10 days of torture, Jonathan Richardson delivered the fatal blow. Blunt force trauma to Tegan's head. Her small body couldn't take any more. Richardson finally took her to the emergency room, claimed she fell off a bed, said it was an accident. The medical staff knew immediately that was a lie. The injuries were too extensive, too varied, too consistent with systematic abuse. A nurse physically attacked Richardson, jumped on him, grabbed him, tried to rip out his throat. She was so enraged by what she saw that she assaulted him right there in the hospital. Hospital security had to pull her off. She wasn't charged with assault. Everyone understood why she did it. Police were called. Richardson was arrested. Tegan was pronounced dead. And one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in North Carolina history began. Detectives who'd worked homicide for decades said they'd never seen anything like it. An 18-year veteran sheriff's deputy broke down crying on the witness stand. Sheriff Steve Bizzell, a man who'd seen countless crimes, called it the worst case of torture of a child and child abuse and neglect that we've ever seen. The evidence was overwhelming: the forensic reports, the video, the bite marks, the broken bones, the sexual trauma, the 144 documented injuries. Jonathan Richardson was charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. In March 2014, after a trial that devastated everyone who sat through it, a jury found Jonathan Richardson guilty of first-degree murder. The penalty phase began. Jurors had to decide: life in prison or death. Prosecutors presented three aggravating factors. First, the murder was committed during the commission of a sexual offense. Second, the murder was committed during a kidnapping. Tegan was confined in that shed, unable to leave, unable to escape. Third, and most important, the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. That third aggravator is reserved for the worst of the worst. Cases where the victim suffered unimaginable torment. Cases where death was slow, painful, deliberate. Tegan Skiba suffered for 10 days. 144 wounds. 66 bite marks, broken arms, sexual assault, forced alcohol, and finally, fatal head trauma. The jury unanimously agreed this was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. Jonathan Richardson was sentenced to death. He was sent to Central Prison in Raleigh, death row, where North Carolina houses all condemned inmates awaiting execution. Richardson immediately appealed. Every death sentence is automatically appealed in North Carolina. The process takes years, sometimes decades. The appeals work their way through the system. The North Carolina Court of Appeals reviewed the case, found no reversible error, upheld the conviction and sentence. Richardson appealed to the North Carolina Supreme Court. In September 2023, 9 years after the trial, the Supreme Court issued a 225-page opinion. 6 justices voted to uphold Richardson's conviction and death sentence. 1 dissented. The Supreme Court reviewed every aspect of the trial, every evidentiary ruling, every jury instruction, every alleged error raised by the defense. They found the trial was fair. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury was properly instructed. The sentence was appropriate. Jonathan Richardson will die for murdering Tegan Skiba. The only question is when. North Carolina hasn't executed anyone since 2006. There's been an unofficial moratorium on executions for nearly 20 years. Legal challenges to lethal injection protocols, difficulty obtaining execution drugs, political reluctance to restart executions. But in October 2025, North Carolina passed Irina's Law. Legislation aimed at restarting executions using alternative methods if lethal injection drugs aren't available. The law is named after a murder victim and represents a push to enforce death sentences already imposed. Still, executions haven't resumed. Jonathan Richardson remains on death row, alive, appealing, waiting. On December 31, 2024, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper granted clemency to 15 death row inmates, commuted their sentences to life without parole, a controversial decision that enraged victims' families and delighted death penalty opponents. Jonathan Richardson was not among the 15. His death sentence stands. Why wasn't he included? The governor's office hasn't publicly explained the selection criteria, but the especially heinous nature of Richardson's crime likely played a role. 4-year-old child tortured for 10 days, 144 wounds. Nobody wants to be the governor who granted mercy to that defendant. So Richardson waits, on death row, in a cell, with decades of appeals still ahead of him. Tegan Skiba would be 19 years old now. Should be in college, or starting a career, or figuring out her life. Should have had 70, 80, maybe 90 years ahead of her. She got 4 years. 4 years of life. And the last 10 days were spent in unimaginable agony at the hands of a man she called Daddy. Helen Reyes, Tegan's mother, was also charged. She pleaded guilty to child abuse in 2019. She admitted she knew about prior abuse and left Tegan with Richardson anyway. She was sentenced to 18 to 31 months, served her time, released. She's free now. Tegan's biological father wasn't in the picture. Extended family tried to intervene over the years, but Helen kept them at a distance. By the time anyone realized how bad the situation was, Tegan was dead. The case raised massive questions about child protective services. Were there red flags that were missed? Were there reports that weren't followed up? Were there opportunities to remove Tegan from that shed before Richardson killed her? Investigations after Tegan's death revealed system failures. Warning signs that weren't acted upon. Reports that weren't properly investigated. A child who slipped through the cracks. Those failures are common in child abuse cases. Overworked caseworkers, insufficient resources, parents who lie and hide evidence, children too young or too scared to tell the truth. By the time the system realizes something's wrong, it's often too late. Tegan Skiba deserved better. Deserved a mother who protected her. Deserved adults who intervened when they saw injuries. Deserved a system that kept her safe. She didn't get any of that. She got 10 days of torture and a death that never should have happened. Jonathan Richardson is exactly the type of defendant death penalty supporters point to. Brutal crime, helpless victim, overwhelming evidence, no mitigating factors that excuse or explain his actions. If anyone deserves execution, they argue, it's someone who tortures a 4-year-old child to death. Death penalty opponents counter that executing Richardson doesn't bring Tegan back, that life in prison is sufficient punishment, that the death penalty is applied inconsistently and is fundamentally unjust. North Carolina is caught between these competing viewpoints. Death penalty on the books but not enforced. Inmates on death row who may never be executed. Families waiting for justice that may never come. For Tegan's family, the wait is excruciating. Richardson is alive, Tegan is dead, and nobody knows if or when his sentence will actually be carried out. The debate continues. But Tegan Skiba can't participate in that debate. She can't advocate for herself. She can't tell her story. We have to tell it for her. Have to make sure people know what happened to her. Have to demand that the system does better, protects children better, intervenes before it's too late. Because Tegan Skiba is not just a statistic, not just a case number. She was a 4-year-old child who loved life, who trusted the adults around her, who deserved so much better than the hand she was dealt. And Jonathan Richardson took all of that away from her. Slowly, deliberately, over 10 agonizing days. He sits on death row now, fed 3 meals a day, housed, clothed, alive, with access to appeals, to attorneys, to due process. Tegan Skiba is in a grave. She never got to grow up, never got to experience the life she should have had. That's the reality of this case. That's why it's so hard to hear. And that's why Jonathan Richardson's death sentence, whether carried out or not, represents society's judgment that some crimes are simply unforgivable. Welcome to the final part of our investigation into 10 North Carolina murders. We've covered a lot of ground. Poison and false accusations, hate crimes and NFL killings, international murder and satanic horror, dismemberment and child torture. Now it's time to step back and look at what these cases tell us about justice in America. Because the sentences don't match, the outcomes don't align, and the families left behind are asking the same question: was this really justice? Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Unknown. Hit that notification bell. Drop a comment telling us which case impacted you most. Your support helps us bring you more deep dive true crime coverage. Let's examine what we've learned. 10 cases, 10 murders, but wildly different outcomes. Ann Miller Kantz poisoned her husband with arsenic, injected it into his IV while he was hospitalized, and killed him slowly over weeks. She's serving 25 to 31 and a half years, eligible for release in September 2029. She'll walk out of prison in her 60s, having served less than 3 decades for premeditated, calculated murder. Craig Stephen Hicks executed 3 Muslim students in 36 seconds, shot them in the head at point-blank range in their own apartment. He's serving 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. He'll die in prison. No chance of release. Ever. Deidra Lane shot her NFL husband Fred Lane twice with a shotgun, once in the chest, once execution style, in the back of the head. She served less than 6 years, released in 2009. She's been free for 16 years, living under a different name, working, rebuilding her life. 6 years for execution-style murder. Robert Jason Owens killed a pregnant woman, her husband, and their unborn daughter, dismembered the pregnant woman in a shower, cremated their remains in a wood stove. He's serving 59 and a half to 74 and a half years. He'll die in prison, but not from execution, just from old age. He's essentially got life without parole. Crystal Mangum falsely accused 3 Duke lacrosse players of rape, destroying their reputations and lives. Then she stabbed her boyfriend in the back while he was trying to flee, killing him. She's serving 14 to 18 years. She'll be released in February 2026. Just months from now. She'll be in her 40s, with decades of life ahead of her. Jason Young allegedly drove 170 miles in the middle of the night to beat his pregnant wife to death with at least 30 blows to the head, then drove back to his hotel. The evidence was entirely circumstantial. No murder weapon, no DNA, no witnesses except a traumatized 2-year-old. He's serving life without parole. He'll die in prison based on theories and timeline analysis. Molly Martens and Tom Martens beat Jason Corbett to death with a baseball bat and concrete paving stone. At least 12 blows. Skull shattered into pieces. Medical examiner said 8 blows would have rendered him unconscious, and 4 were independently fatal. They served 4 years. Released in June 2024. They're free now. Walking around, living their lives. Pazuzu Algarad killed 2 men and buried them in his backyard. Police had credible tips for 5 years and did nothing. Algarad died by suicide before trial. His girlfriend Amber Birch is serving 30 to 39 years for her role in one of the murders. She'll be released in her 60s. Crystal Matlock, the accessory, served 3 to 5 years. She's been free since 2018. Amanda Hayes and Grant Hayes killed Laura Ackerson, dismembered her body, drove 1,200 miles, and dumped her in an alligator-infested creek. Grant got life without parole. Amanda got 13 to 16 and a half years in North Carolina plus 20 years consecutive in Texas. She won't be released until at least 2034, possibly 2044. She'll be in her 50s or 60s when she gets out. Jonathan Richardson tortured a 4-year-old child for 10 days. 144 wounds, 66 bite marks, broken arms, sexual assault. He was sentenced to death. He's on death row. North Carolina hasn't executed anyone since 2006. He could sit on death row for decades before his sentence is carried out, if it ever is. Look at those outcomes. Really look at them. Deidra Lane served 6 years for execution-style murder. Molly and Tom Martens served 4 years for beating a man's skull into pieces. Crystal Mangum will serve about 15 years for murder and will be released next year. But Craig Hicks, Jason Young, Robert Owens, and Grant Hayes all got life without parole or equivalence. What's the difference? Why do some killers walk free after a few years while others die in prison? Let's break down what actually determines sentencing in murder cases. Because it's not just about the crime, it's about a complex web of factors that often seem arbitrary. Factor 1. Plea deals. Ann Miller Kantz pleaded guilty, avoided trial, got second-degree murder instead of first-degree, 25 to 31 and a half years instead of life without parole. Deidra Lane pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, should have been murder, got 7 years, 11 months. Molly and Tom Martens pleaded to voluntary manslaughter after their murder convictions were overturned. Got 51 to 74 months with time served. Walked out after 4 years. Amanda Hayes pleaded to second-degree murder. Got 13 to 16 and a half years. But Texas added 20 more for evidence tampering. Plea deals are about risk management. Prosecutors don't want to lose at trial. Defense attorneys don't want their clients facing maximum sentences, so they negotiate, and sometimes the negotiations produce outcomes that don't match the severity of the crime. Factor 2. Quality of defense. Jason Young had a vigorous defense team. They got a mistrial in the first trial with the jury leaning toward acquittal 8-4, but in the second trial, prosecutors introduced new evidence, and the defense couldn't overcome it. Molly and Tom Martens had exceptional attorneys who successfully appealed their convictions and got them overturned. That led to the plea deal that freed them after 4 years. Crystal Mangum had a public defender. She was convicted despite claiming self-defense. Robert Owens confessed and pleaded guilty, limited his legal options but avoided the death penalty. Quality of representation matters enormously. Wealthy defendants with top-tier attorneys get better outcomes than poor defendants with overworked public defenders. That's just reality. Factor 3. Race and gender. We can't ignore it. The demographics of these cases matter. Deidra Lane, a black woman, served 6 years for execution-style murder of her NFL husband. The plea deal was controversial, but some advocates argued she was a domestic violence victim defending herself despite evidence to the contrary. Craig Hicks, a white man, got 3 consecutive life sentences for killing 3 Muslim students. The hate crime debate added complexity, but there's no question he's dying in prison. Ann Miller Kantz, a white woman, got 25 to 31 and a half years for poisoning her husband. Could have faced life without parole. Jason Young, a white man, got life without parole on entirely circumstantial evidence. Crystal Mangum, a black woman, is serving 14 to 18 years and will be released soon. Her Duke lacrosse false accusations and pattern of violence didn't result in a maximum sentence. Gender seems to play a role. Female defendants often receive shorter sentences than male defendants for comparable crimes. Studies consistently show this disparity. Race adds another layer. The 3 Muslim victims in the Hicks case brought international attention and pressure for maximum sentencing. Would the outcome have been different if the victims were different? We'll never know. But it's a valid question. Factor 4. Victim sympathy. Michelle Young was pregnant when she was murdered. Her 2-year-old daughter was in the house. Those facts generate enormous sympathy and likely contributed to Jason Young's life sentence, despite circumstantial evidence. Tegan Skiba was 4 years old, tortured for 10 days, 144 wounds. The brutality was so extreme that Jonathan Richardson got the death penalty and wasn't included in the governor's clemency list. Fred Lane was an NFL player, beloved by teammates, with a promising career ahead. But his killer served only 6 years. Why? The self-defense narrative, despite lack of evidence, may have generated some sympathy for Deidra. Laura Ackerson was a young mother fighting for custody. Her dismemberment and disposal generated massive media coverage. Grant got life. Amanda got decades split between 2 states. The victims' identities matter. Children generate maximum outrage. Pregnant women generate sympathy. Young people with promising futures generate media attention. And media attention often translates to prosecutorial pressure for maximum sentences. Factor 5. Evidence quality. Craig Hicks' case had a 36-second audio recording of the murders, open and shut. He pleaded guilty, got the maximum. Jason Young's case was entirely circumstantial. Gas station clerk testimony, computer searches, suspicious alibi, toddler trauma behavior, no physical evidence, but he still got life without parole. Ann Miller-Kontz's case cracked open only because attorney-client privilege was pierced after her co-conspirator's suicide. Without that breakthrough, she might have walked free. The Martens case had overwhelming physical evidence, 12 blows to the skull, blood evidence, medical examiner testimony. They were convicted of murder. But legal technicalities got the convictions overturned, leading to the voluntary manslaughter plea. Strong evidence doesn't always mean maximum sentence. Weak evidence doesn't always mean acquittal. The legal process is unpredictable. Factor 6. Prosecutorial discretion. District attorneys decide what charges to file, whether to offer plea deals, whether to seek the death penalty, whether to retry cases after appeals. In the Martens case, prosecutors faced a retrial after the Supreme Court ordered it. They could have gone forward, risked losing, or they could negotiate a plea deal that guaranteed some prison time. They chose the plea deal. In Deidra Lane's case, prosecutors accepted a voluntary manslaughter plea, despite evidence suggesting premeditated murder. Maybe they doubted they could prove first-degree murder. Maybe they wanted to avoid trial. Maybe they believed the self-defense narrative had some credibility. Prosecutors have enormous power, and they exercise that power based on factors we can't always see: political pressure, resource constraints, risk assessment, personal judgment. Factor 7. Appeals and legal technicalities. The Martens convictions were overturned because the trial judge excluded certain evidence about the children's statements. The North Carolina Supreme Court ruled 4-3 that was error, a single vote difference. If the court had voted 5-2 the other way, Molly and Tom would still be serving 20 to 25 years. Jason Young's conviction was vacated by the Court of Appeals. But the Supreme Court reversed that and reinstated the conviction. Again, appellate decisions swinging the outcome dramatically. The legal system has layers of review. Sometimes those layers correct errors. Sometimes they create new injustices. The process is messy and imperfect. Let's talk about the people who don't get closure, who don't get justice, who live with the outcomes we've described. Eric Miller's family watched his killer plead guilty 5 years after his death. They waded through legal battles over attorney-client privilege. They watched Ann Miller get 25 to 31.5 years when she could have faced life. They know she'll be released in 2029. They're counting down. The families of Dea Barakat, Yusor Abu Salha, and Razan Abu Salha fought for the murders to be recognized as a hate crime. They didn't get federal hate crime charges, the FBI said, insufficient evidence, but they got 3 consecutive life sentences. Craig Hicks will die in prison. That's something, but it doesn't bring back 3 brilliant young people with their whole lives ahead of them. Fred Lane's family and teammates watched Deidra serve less than 6 years for execution-style murder. They watched her walk free, change her name, get a job working with children at a summer camp. They know the justice system valued Fred's life at 6 years in prison. Jason Corbett's children, Jack and Sarah, watched their father's killers get convicted of murder and sentenced to 20 to 25 years. Then they watched those convictions get overturned. Then, they watched Molly and Tom plead to manslaughter and walk free after 4 years. They issued victim impact statements calling Molly a monster. They live in Ireland now, far from the place where their father was beaten to death. They'll never see real justice. The Codd's families lost Christy, JT, and unborn Skylar to a neighbor they trusted. Robert Owens confessed, but claimed accidental deaths. He's serving decades, essentially life, but he's also connected to the unsolved disappearance of Zeb Quinn from 2000. The Quinn family has waited 25 years for answers about their son. Owens knows more than he's saying, and they may never get the truth. Reginald Daae's family watched Crystal Mangum get convicted of his murder, but they also watched her become famous as the Duke lacrosse accuser. They watched her get 14 to 18 years. They know she's being released in February 2026 after serving about 15 years. They know Reginald was stabbed in the back while fleeing. They know it wasn't self-defense, and they know his killer will be free soon. Michelle Young's family raised her daughter Cassidy after Michelle's murder. They watched Jason Young go through 2 trials. They celebrated when he was finally convicted. They survived his appeals. They know he's serving life without parole. That's justice, by their measure. But Michelle and her unborn son are still gone. Laura Ackerson's family fought for custody of her sons after her murder. They watched Grant get life without parole. They watched Amanda get decades in 2 states. But those boys lost their mother, their father, and their stepmother. They're being raised by extended family, processing unimaginable trauma. All because of a custody dispute that should have been settled in court, not with murder. Tegan Skiba's family watched Jonathan Richardson get convicted and sentenced to death. That was over a decade ago. He's still alive on death row. North Carolina hasn't executed anyone since 2006. They don't know if his sentence will ever be carried out. They know Helen Reyes, Tegan's mother who left her with Richardson despite knowing about prior abuse, served less than 2 years. They know Tegan suffered for 10 days before dying. And they know the justice system is still debating whether Richardson will ever face the ultimate punishment. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Justice is inconsistent. Deidra Lane served 6 years for execution-style murder. Molly and Tom Martens served 4 years for beating a man's skull into pieces. But Craig Hicks, Jason Young, Grant Hayes, and Robert Owens all got life without parole or equivalent sentences. The factors that determine sentencing plea deals: quality of defense, race and gender, victim sympathy, evidence quality, prosecutorial discretion, appeals create wildly different outcomes for comparable crimes. Is that fair? Is that just? The answer depends on your perspective. If you believe the legal system should treat every defendant as an individual, considering mitigating factors and circumstances, then yes, different outcomes for different cases make sense. Ann Miller's confession through attorney-client privilege was unique. The Martens' convictions being overturned on appeal was a legal process working as designed. Deidra Lane's claims of domestic violence, even if not fully credible, were considered. But if you believe justice should be consistent, that similar crimes should receive similar punishments, then no, these outcomes aren't fair. How can execution-style murder result in 6 years, while circumstantial murder results in life without parole? How can beating someone to death with 12 skull-shattering blows result in 4 years? There's another uncomfortable truth. Some victims' lives are valued more than others by the justice system. The 3 Muslim students killed by Craig Hicks got international media attention, federal investigation, and 3 consecutive life sentences for their killer. Fred Lane, an NFL player, got 6 years of prison time for his killer. Is that because the Hicks case had clear premeditation and the Lane case involved claims of self-defense, or is there something else going on? Tegan Skiba was tortured for 10 days, suffered 144 wounds, and her killer got the death penalty. But North Carolina hasn't executed anyone in nearly 20 years. Is that death sentence meaningful if it's never carried out? Is justice served if Jonathan Richardson dies of old age on death row 40 years from now? Laura Ackerson was dismembered and fed to alligators. Her killer Grant got life. His accomplice Amanda got decades in 2 states. Christy Codd was dismembered and cremated. Her killer Robert Owens got essentially life. But Jason Corbett was beaten to death, and his killers got 4 years. Why the disparity? Legal technicalities, appeals, plea deals, prosecutorial strategy. Factors that have nothing to do with the severity of the crime or the suffering of the victim. Jonathan Richardson is the only defendant in our 10 cases who received a death sentence. He's been on death row since 2014, 11 years and counting. North Carolina hasn't executed anyone since 2006, 19 years without an execution. Legal challenges to lethal injection protocols, difficulty obtaining execution drugs, political opposition, judicial reluctance. 136 inmates sit on North Carolina's death row as of December 2025. They've been sentenced to death. Juries determined they deserved the ultimate punishment, but they're not being executed. In December 2024, Governor Roy Cooper granted clemency to 15 of those inmates, commuted their sentences to life without parole. He said the death penalty is riddled with flaws and applied inconsistently. Jonathan Richardson wasn't among the 15. His crime was too heinous. 4-year-old child tortured to death. Public opinion wouldn't tolerate clemency for him. But if he's not getting clemency, and North Carolina isn't executing anyone, what's his actual sentence? Life in a smaller cell with fewer privileges? Is that meaningfully different from life without parole? Death penalty supporters argue that some crimes are so horrific, so beyond the pale, that death is the only appropriate punishment. They point to Jonathan Richardson, to the 144 wounds on a 4-year-old child, to the video of Tegan standing with broken arms, crying, 9 days before she died. They say, if not him, then who? If torturing a child to death doesn't warrant execution, what does? Death penalty opponents counter that the system is broken, that it's applied inconsistently based on race, geography, quality of defense counsel, that innocent people have been executed, that life without parole is sufficient punishment and cheaper than decades of death penalty appeals. They point to the disparities we've discussed. Why did Jonathan Richardson get death while others got life without parole? Is his crime objectively worse than Craig Hicks executing 3 people? Worse than Ann Miller slowly poisoning her husband? Worse than the Martens beating Jason Corbett's skull into pieces? The answer isn't clear. And North Carolina has essentially punted on the question by maintaining the death penalty on the books, but never enforcing it. That creates a strange limbo. Death row inmates waiting for an execution that may never come. Families of victims waiting for closure that may never arrive. A punishment that exists in theory but not in practice. These 10 cases left devastation far beyond the immediate victims. Jack and Sarah Corbett lost their biological mother to illness, their father to murder, and watched their adoptive mother walk free after 4 years. They live in Ireland now, far from the place where their father died, processing trauma that will affect them forever. Grant Hayes IV and Gentle Hayes lost their mother to murder, their father to life imprisonment, and their stepmother to decades in prison. They're being raised by extended family, knowing their parents killed their mother over a custody dispute. Cassidy Young lost her mother and unborn sibling to murder, watched her father go to prison for life, and processed trauma she was too young to fully understand. She's in her early 20s now, building a life despite horrific early childhood trauma. Eric Miller's colleagues in AIDS research lost a brilliant mind. Medical research lost potential discoveries. Patients lost treatments that might have been developed if Eric had lived. Dia Barakat was raising money for Syrian refugees. Yusor Abu Salha was preparing for dental school to serve underserved communities. Razan Abu Salha was studying sustainable architecture. 3 young people dedicated to helping others, killed in 36 seconds. Fred Lane never fulfilled his NFL potential. His teammates still remember him. The Panthers still honor his memory, but 2001 rushing yards is all he'll ever have. Christy Codd's culinary career was cut short. The meals she would have cooked, the restaurants she might have opened, the food culture she could have influenced, all lost. The ripples of violence spread far beyond the immediate crime scene. Families shattered, communities traumatized, potential erased, futures stolen. Where they are now. December 2025. Let's do a final roll call of where these defendants stand today. Ann Miller Kantz is incarcerated at a North Carolina women's correctional facility, serving 25 to 31 and a half years for poisoning her husband Eric. Earliest release, September 2029. She'll be in her mid-60s. She's served 20 years so far. 9 years left minimum. Craig Stephen Hicks is incarcerated at Bertie Correctional Institution in Windsor, North Carolina, serving 3 consecutive life sentences without parole for executing Dia Barakat, Yusor Abu Salha, and Razan Abu Salha. He'll die in prison. Deidra Lane was released March 3, 2009. She served less than 6 years for shooting Fred Lane execution style. She's been free for 16 years, changed her name to Deidra Gary, living her life. The The justice system is done with her. Robert Jason Owens is incarcerated at a North Carolina facility, serving 59.5 to 74.5 years for killing Christy Codd, J.T. Codd, and unborn Skylar. Earliest release: approximately 2076, when he'll be 96 or 97 years old, essentially life without parole. Crystal Mangum is incarcerated at North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women, serving 14 to 18 years for murdering Reginald Day. Projected release: February 27, 2026. Just months from now. She'll be in her 40s with decades of life ahead of her. Jason Young is incarcerated at Piedmont Correctional Institution in Salisbury, North Carolina, serving life without parole for murdering his pregnant wife Michelle and their unborn son. He'll die in prison. His appeals have been exhausted. Molly Martens and Tom Martens were released June 6, 2024. They served approximately 4 years for beating Jason Corbett to death. They're free now, living under their names. The Netflix documentary made them famous in a way they probably didn't want. But they're out. They're free. The justice system is done with them. Amber Birch is incarcerated at Anson Correctional Institution, serving 30 years 8 months to 39 years 2 months for her role in Tommy Welch's murder in the Pazuzu Algarad case. Projected release: May 2045. She'll be in her 60s. She's got 2 decades left to serve. Grant Hayes is incarcerated at Eastern Correctional Institution in Maury, North Carolina, serving life without parole for murdering Laura Ackerson. He continues claiming innocence, most recently in an October 2024 ABC interview. He'll die in prison. Amanda Hayes was transferred to Texas custody in August 2024, currently at Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas, serving 13 to 16.5 years from North Carolina, plus 20 years consecutive from Texas. Projected release: 2034 to 2044. She'll be in her 50s or 60s. Jonathan Richardson is on death row at Central Prison in Raleigh, sentenced to death for torturing 4-year-old Tegan Skiba to death. His death sentence was upheld by the North Carolina Supreme Court in September 2023. He was not among the 15 inmates granted clemency in December 2024. But North Carolina hasn't executed anyone since 2006. He could sit on death row for decades.